Thanks. Now it's time for all of you to ask any questions that you might have. And maybe if the three of you would come up here and sit up the front. And I hope you have questions, because usually a chairman has to ask an awkward question if there's none come from the audience. So please help me out.
I'm fascinated by Catherine's talk in relation to the comings and goings, between here in London and things. And it kind of puts me in mind that, whether it's the Egyptian Copts coming to here or whether it's the Vikings, who arrived and Latterly and Grace O'Malley's, era. There's an awful lot going on at sea, and is it possible that more work or more research could be gone into the fact that the sea was used a hell of a lot more for communication than obviously the land, because we were an island, off an island, heavily forested and that. So I just wonder, is there an opening there, so to speak, for more research into maritime transport links?
Well, yeah, there is, I suppose. There's always more time. I'd only be able to talk now to you about the 16th and 17th century. And, we forget that Galway was the principal port for the shipment, particularly of wine. People always mention, Dublin and Cork, Youghal even, but it was ruled by the 12 tribes, as we know, who were of Anglo-Norman descent. And the people like the O'Malleys and other O'Flahertys, over the Galway West link was from the ferocious O'Flahertys, good Lord deliver us, the merchants in Galway, because they were dead afraid of the attacks by. And why would the O'Flahertys attack them? Well, because they charged them so much when they wanted to trade there. They put on extra taxes on them. There's an old, what would I call it? It's a corporation law, and it says, neither a mac nor a no shall strut ne swagger through the streets of Galway. In other words, they were banning all the Gaelic chieftains from doing business there. So consequently, the people like the O'Malleys, and to a degree the O'Flahertys, had to find markets elsewhere. So the fact that they had this maritime expertise, you're so right. If we went to maybe the north coast of Spain, maybe there are some records there. If we went to the west coast of France, certainly the contact between the O'Malleys and the various chieftains in Scotland is without, you don't even have to worry about that. That is in every single document you will find. Don't forget the mercenaries were brought in here. We think of the Irish fighting battles always. They didn't fight them. They brought the Scottish mercenaries in to fight their battles from May to October every year. If you go to Murryscabby, you will see the graves of a MacDonald family, and there were the gallows glasses to the O'Malleys. And I'm sure the Lydon family would have been descended from them in Westport. He was a veterinary, a vet actually. He was here in Westport House. He was vet to Westport House for a good many years. But that MacDonald family, were part of, and every time I think of gallows glasses when I see their grave. So to answer your question, yeah, I think there's a whole load of research there to be done on trade between Ireland and the rest of Europe during that period. Definitely.
Two other questions.
Might be terrific for the Grace O'Malley ship to take that on board too,
That's a point. Just maybe we can incorporate it into the Grace O'Malley Heritage Centre that's happening here.
I did, yeah. I put all the experts on it. I'm just after finishing a little help with them. They're redoing the little Grace O'Malley Centre out in Louisburg, and I wanted to show children, where were the sea routes and what did you import and what did you export, basic stuff like that makes life very interesting. It's lovely to see what they brought in and what they exported, and you don't get that in the history books a lot. You just say, well, they traded with, well, what did they trade? It's lovely. I think that makes it all come alive really and makes it understandable. Sorry.
Just to the point, if I may, and that is the link. Is there much evidence of the link between the O'Malloys and the O'Malleys? Mm-hmm. And secondly, this great seafarer, Admiral Brown, who had incredible strength of character and whatever, and went on to form the Argentinian Navy, and then went on to form a relationship with Garibaldi and people like that. Is there any evidence of a link between the Browns here and the O'Malloys?
Well, genetically they are related in the sense that they are part of that Nile of the Nine Hostages group. But the common ancestor with the Malloys would be about somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 years ago. So that's how close the common ancestor is.
Just one point, Peter, if I may, to Leslie's question about the Maritime Links. There was a Captain George O'Malley, known as George the Smuggler, in, I think, the late 17th century. I could be getting my dates wrong. Who wrote a biography, or an autobiography, I should say, which various people looked at and decided couldn't possibly be published because it was too outrageous. I don't know whether that modern day audiences would feel the same thing or not. But in any case, he was a smuggler, and his father had been a smuggler, and there were lots of cousins and things who were smugglers. And a lot of it seemed to have been with the Channel Islands. Okay. There were trading houses in the Channel Islands, and people who were agents for them, and then the stuff would be brought from there into Connemara, and then smuggled by various routes over hills and things like that. And there's quite a lot of detail on that. There's a paper that a fellow called Louis Cullen, who was professor of history in Trinity, wrote on the subject. Okay. So certainly there was a lot there.
Interesting.
And Sir Neil O'Donnell from Newport House was meant to have made his money from smuggling, and some of the O'Donnells that had fled with the flight of the Earls to Spain might have supplied him with the wine. And also later than that, Maxwell in the Wild Sports of the West, he talks about travelling around Ballycroy, and all the travel between the various houses is by sea rather than by road. And he even mentions that some of the roads in the wintertime were completely impassable because they'd be just mud and turn into swamps, and the horses couldn't get through.
Just a question for Anne. I'm curious to know what role Grace would have played in relation to the Spanish Armada.
Very, very interesting. There is absolutely no mention of Grace O'Malley during the Spanish Armada, and I found that very strange. Now, there was a mention of the then chieftain on the island, that there was a hint from Bingham that he actually collaborated. Bingham was told to get every Spanish body, live or dead, that came in here. At least 3 ships were foundered, one off Clare Island, one in Fahy, yeah, and I think also there was another one that they haven't pinpointed. So let's say also Mendoza himself was supposed to have come on to Clare Island, the famous Mendoza. And yet there is no mention whatsoever of Grace O'Malley. Now, it was 1588. She would have been in rebellion at the time against Bingham. And Bingham doesn't even mention her. Now, she may have been on a voyage, you don't know with her. But it is extraordinary that there is no mention of her particularly during that time.
Now, one of the anchors reputedly from vessels was fished up some years ago by just south of Clare Island. And it was transported to...
Yeah, I saw it. I actually touched it, yeah.
So it is still existing.
It is, yeah.
It hasn't.
And they had another one here, hadn't they? Wasn't there supposed to be an Armada anchor here?
Oh, we had the cannon, which is actually...
Oh, was the cannon?
We moved it down to beside our statue, actually, outside, so it's still there.
Yeah.
Cannons survive a little bit better.
Yeah.
So I'm pleased to know that anchor still exists, because I thought if it was being transported to Dublin, it would be put in a cellar and forgotten.
Well, it possibly is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Catherine, just a question for yourself. Whatever became of the 2 Grecian columns?
Well, actually, that's really interesting. Obviously, they were hidden. put away, and they were discovered in the basement of the house in 1906 by George Ulick, who went on to become the 6th Marquess of Sligo. And he decided what was he going to do with these 2 columns, and he actually donated them to the British Museum, where they are today. And actually, if you go to the British Museum, on the entryway right into the
Room
section,
Room 11.
Room 11, and they're on the way in there. And actually, in 1943, the British Museum sent over 2 replicas of those columns, and they're at the south of the house. So there you go.
Can I add just another little thing? One of my next ventures is to get the British Museum. When the then Lord Sligo said he'd donate them, they asked them for the columns. The columns were brought here by Howe Peter, and they were forgotten about and just laid down. And the only thing, the sarcophagus that is outside. He brought a load of other stuff, but it was useless. There's a photograph of it that I found about 1910 or 1912, and they're only all bits of things that he found. He really didn't. He didn't find these columns. He was given to them by the Turkish dictator Veli Pasha. And he talks about how he was entertained by Veli Pasha out in the Morea in Greece. And it's a lovely little, because he kept such detail. He kept a huge diary of his time with Byron out in Greece particularly. And he talks all about that. Indeed, I've put a lot of that into the book because I found it so fascinating myself. So he comes back with the columns here. Forgot about them. He's 10 kids suddenly, and he's loads of other things to do. And that other Marquess of Sligo, was it
It's George.
George.
Yeah.
The British Museum contacted him and said, do you realise what you have? They didn't know what they had. So they gave them over to the British Museum, and the British Museum, on condition that they would acknowledge where they came from and who had found them and brought them back. And the British Museum, I go in a couple of times and I asked to see somebody. I said, why did you never acknowledge this? And I had the letters to say that this is what they had to do. So I'm going to get at them again, just to acknowledge, to say. And that he gave them for nothing, you know. So if you go into the British Museum, on the ground floor, on room 11, there they are. So it's a lovely little contact. And it's funny, this thing of, you know, treasure seeking. We think it's awful now. Napoleon was a dab-handed, and look at all he took from everywhere and anywhere he was. But during what I found that during the early 1800s, particularly in the universities, young students like Howe Peter, he went to Cambridge, were being told by their professors that these artefacts were in danger because Greece had been taken over by Turkey. And Howe Peter writes himself of seeing Turkish gunmen taking pot shots of the Pantheon in the Acropolis. So they were told they should go out there and save them and put them into museums. They didn't make any money off them. There's the Elgin Marbles, another one. He just preceded Howe Peter. Now he brought a lot of stuff back. And they felt that they were safer there than under Turkish rule, and they were being damaged. They talk about horses being fed into, like sarcophagus that he brought back here. They were being used by the Turkish and by abused. So we think it's terrible today to go treasure seeking in these places. But that was the mentality that pervaded at the time. And you can never judge these things from the hindsight of the 21st century. You have to judge them in what is happening during that period. At least that's what I try to do anyway. You know, not to judge them from the heights of the 21st century. Sorry about that now, but that's just my little thing about it. Yeah?
A slightly different tack. One of the things that Catherine referred to, well, in terms of the succession, was raising one of the children as a Protestant so that he could inherit. And this whole role that religion played in succession and in property and in the fortunes of different families. I'm just interested in from both Maurice and Anne in trying to decipher genealogies and who's who and what the line of descent was, where deliberately in some of them, if you had a record where some of the family were Catholic, others were Protestant, that the Catholic ones weren't even mentioned.
Yeah.
It's been a real
well, it's usually the girls, you know, when they made that huge decision, as Catherine said, you know, the girls remain Catholic. It was an awful thing, an awful decision to have to make, and particularly somebody like the Browns, who were born Catholic themselves, you know, and had married into all the Catholic Gaelic families around the place, Daly's and all the others. And to make that decision, it was absolutely terrible. And as I said about the Viscount Mayo, you know, he wasn't allowed to become Viscount Mayo because certainly his means were very poor. He was just a tenant farmer over in Ascalon, but he also was a Roman Catholic, and that was a no-no, even in the 1800s, you know. So religion did unfortunately play a huge role, and in genealogy, I think you're right. And then church records for Catholics, you know, are, you know, non-existent before 1800s, I think, you know. And then, of course, the Civil War killed and knocked everything else. All our own records were all gone there. You know, I was so lucky to find these few things about Tibbetnalong in the old forecourts. You know, now they're all removed now to the National Archives. And as I said, the one that I quoted from bore marks of the fire of the 1922. You know, it was amazing, really. So sad that that happened when it did, yeah.
The Olaf Borishul, who was one of the figures in the genealogy in the project that Morris has been leading, had, I think, 6 or 7 sons as well as a number of daughters, but some of the pedigrees only mention the ones who changed and who became Protestants. So that you, when you got to 1798, you had on one side magistrates and military people on the Protestant side, and you also had rebels on the Catholic side who would have been second cousins, like Seamus Bawn, who was hanged in the poem you mentioned, and Sir George, whose statue is in Castlebar. So it was really divided.
Yeah, and the O'Malleys then, of course, became agents to the Binghams during the famine, and weren't there. It didn't really. I suppose you have to examine all the negatives. You know, there's a negative and a positive to every person, just like there is today. And you know, the O'Malleys there were 2 agents. I think a son succeeded a father as agent to the Binghams, who did not have a good record. The family here had a brilliant record during the famine. Now, during the famine, for their tenants, but the Binghams didn't, and the O'Malleys were their agents. You know, so that's another little. Sorry about bringing up these little nasties, but you know they're in every family. Yeah.
I have a question. In the defeat in 1601, when the flight of the Earls, how much of an effect did that have on the dispersion of the Gaelic order? Because I know that in 1619 that was a huge defeat, not true because I'm learning about it. But,
huge.
How much of an effect?
1601 is the end of the old Gaelic order that had stayed on in Ireland for 2,000 years. Now, it had been affected by the Norman invasion, but actually they absorbed the Normans into it. And as we learned from our history books, some of the Normans became more Irish than the Irish themselves. Remember, we used to that. Kinsale was, it's like the famine, really. It's so big. And you know, it gets overlooked by Irish historians, just like they dismissed Grace O'Malley, and even more so her son. And why? Because I have to tell you, and I'm sorry to have to say it, I hope it doesn't shock you, but 2 of Grace O'Malley's sons fought with the English at the Battle of Kinsale, Merrick na Muir O'Flaherty and Tibbetnalong. So there you go. Now, why did they do that? Because there was no future for them. The old, outmoded Gaelic Ireland had reached, it had gone. 100 years before that, England was equally as bad, the War of the Roses, one fighting one another, who was going to be King of England, I want to be King, no, it's me, all at war for 100 years. They settled under the Tudors. The Tudors knocked heads together and said, we're the legitimate. They weren't at all, but they just, out of sheer PR, they got there. And they had 3 or 4 great, a century of rule under the Tudors. That didn't happen in Ireland. And I often ask the question, if the O'Neill and O'Donnell had won at Kinsale, would Ireland be any different then? would the Desmonds of Munster agree to be ruled by the northern chieftains that they hardly even knew? Would the great Earl of Kildare agree to be? Would the de Burgos or de Burkes of? You see, you don't. They just missed out. They were outmoded by 100 years, the old Gaelic law, and it was intertribal feuding, and the British or the English took advantage of that, divide and conquer. And that's what happened at Kinsale. So you had to be all about survival, and that's what I love about the 16th century. There's no flag, there's no ideology like in later centuries, and that is why Grace O'Malley and her family and the century tends to get airbrushed, because all our past generations of historians wanted Ireland and Irish people to be a certain genre. The women had to be charitable, childbearing, good housekeepers. Imagine having a woman like Grace O'Malley, they're a bad example to the rest of the generations that are coming up.
Well, she spoke like a sailor, didn't she?
And the men had to be out with the flag, fighting for Ireland forever. That doesn't apply to 16th century. Mm-hmm. Everyone is in it just to survive. And we can all identify with that after COVID and everything. My God, that's what life is all about, really. You have to, the survival of the fittest. Always was, always will be. Tippett Long took the winning side. I found the deal he did with the English. And why did he go with the English? Because Hugh O'Donnell came into Mayo and put a puppet MacWilliam in charge of the Burkes here when Tippett Long was ready to take over where his father had been MacWilliam. And the Burkes all rebelled against that because O'Donnell needed to have a pathway through Mayo in loyal hands to get, as he did, had to do that great march down to Kinsale. And he put in this MacWilliam, and you know, it's the descendants of that MacWilliam that he put over the Burkes, against the will of all the Burkes, including Tippett Long, that the Earldom of Mayo today came and took, remember I told you, took the Viscount Mayo title in order to become Earls of Mayo. They're from that branch of the Burkes that the O'Donnell made, the MacWilliam of Mayo. It's amazing how everything all goes in a circle, you know. But that is the reason why Tippett Long, O'Neill tried to get to him because his ships were essential to them. Think of the long march they had. Tippett Long's galleys that could take 200 fighting men. They're described as being able to take 200 fighting men. Imagine all the men and supplies they could have brought down to Kinsale without that massive march that they had to do by land. So O'Neill came in and tried to do a deal with Tippett Long, but it was too late. He had signed on the dotted line with Connors Clifford, the governor of Connacht, and he took the English side, and Murroch O'Flaherty, her other son, did likewise. And they held on to their lands after Kinsale. Most of the other chieftains lost. You know, all the planters came in to Mayo, Sligo and all that after Kinsale. And then you have the big battle. The battle of the sword is finished after Kinsale. It's the battle of the legal. The legal lawyers come in. Who has rights to land? The Gaelic Irish never had written rights. It was always through tradition. So if you couldn't show a document to say, my father owned that, and it had to be from father to son, as we mentioned earlier, it was election, you know. Gaelic chieftains did not succeed by father from son. An uncle could succeed a nephew, an uncle, a younger son could succeed his father. That's the way it was, provided he was the right man for the job. So you have the legal battle for the lands of Ireland, and Tippett Long came out on top there. He was absolutely brilliant. He was up and down to Dublin protecting his lands in the courts of chancery, non-stop. It was unbelievable. He was a chip off the old maternal block, and that's for sure. But sorry, you know, they're not heroes by our prescribed way, do you know? Yeah. They're humans, you know, and you have to think about that when you're writing biography. You're talking about another human being, not necessarily a historical figure. I'm sorry now for going on. That's another thing. Okay, I promise I won't open my mouth again.
It's a very important point, because there wasn't any sense of nationalism.
Not at all.
During the 1600s.
No.
Now we think that, you know, Brian Boru became the first High King of Ireland and united Ireland. Mm-hmm. And perhaps there was a begrudging nationalism at that point in time. But I think in subsequent centuries it just fragmented again, which was the natural order.
It was. And you see, it was a tribal society. You know, the Europeans, including the Irish, who went to the New World, the Americas, found exactly the same thing. Cheyenne, the Sioux, all of these tribes in America, indeed, which Irish people took their land as well, just as their land had been taken by the English. You know, things never change, human beings never change. They took land off the Native Americans. You know, we forget that as well. You know, and it's an example of, I suppose, man's inhumanity to man. It never stops from century to century. You know.
Just curious, was there ever any connection to the Eastern Maritime provinces in Canada at all, in any of the research?
Between the Eastern Maritime provinces in Canada.
Yeah.
Oh, so
It'd be from the famine, I'm sure, wouldn't it?
like with Grace O'Malley, I mean, and.
Well, just generally, like the whole.
It'd be the famine, really, the gross eel, all of that. You know, the thousands of people who perished.
Right.
You know, the massive graves that are in gross eel from the up the Lawrence River. You know, a lot of Irish people fled to Canada. We always think of America, USA, but no, so many of them went to Canada.
I was just thinking when you mentioned earlier, I didn't quite catch it about the Jamaican connection.
Oh, yeah.
In all the eastern provinces of Canada, they did a lot of trading with Jamaicans in the rum.
Mm.
A lot of the southeastern Irish came over to those eastern provinces in summertime
Yeah.
to work and then go back for different reasons. So just curious, did you ever find
Yes.
any connection? And
Well,
then
the only connection is between Louisburg, you know, Louisburg here and Louisburg in Canada. And that has connections with this house, the Browns. You know, they were fighting in later centuries. They fought in the British Army under Admiral Howe, their uncle. And, you know, they were at the Battle of Louisburg. And that's why then how Peter's father established this town of Louisburg for the Catholic weavers who were shoved out of Northern Ireland by their Protestant co-workers because there wasn't enough work for all of them. And thousands of them came here just before the 1798 rebellion. And they were landless, homeless. And he took them in. They came to him because first the linen industry was still in vogue here. And secondly, he was very good to Catholics because he had been a Catholic himself. And they came, 2,000 of them. And Dennis Brown, who gets a terrible mention in history, the brother of the first Marquess of Sligo, who's Sheriff of Mayo at the time, said, where are we going to put them? And they built the town of Louisburg. And you'll get a lot of northern names on Clare Island. A lot of them went to Clare Island as well. But Louisburg was built, and they named it Louisburg because of the connection with the other relations with the War of Independence in Canada. Yeah, sorry about that.
Whatever happened to the linen industry here? What happened to it?
Oh, it was undercut by British taxes. You know, once any of the Irish industries, and there weren't that many, there was the wool industry first, then there was the linen industry, they were all undercut. You know, huge tariffs put on any exports. And that's why how Peter then tried to set up a corduroy factory here, because the bottom had fallen out of the linen set up by his grandfather. So it was always to do with money. Money, power and religion never changes. Never changes. We saw last night with Salman Rushdie. Never changes.
Just come back to the Armada and the unpleasantness of history. The Spanish Armada, the sailors that came ashore were supposed to have been massacred on Clare Island.
Yes.
Is that
Well,
history?
you know, you have to look at, you think Trump invented fake news. He didn't. It was there all along. And Bingham was great at inventing fake news, and so were the English administrators. Where is the mass grave for this? I don't know. You know, there were said that 300 Spanish survivors came in on Clare Island. Now, imagine in 1588, 300 hungry people coming in, foreigners coming in on Clare Island. That would have been a threat to the people there. There might have only been 100 or 200 people there. And you have all these people coming in, possibly some of them armed still, even though they have been thrown out of ships. Bingham says that, I think it was a Dudara O'Malley who was on Clare Island at the time, that he killed 300 of them. But you couldn't believe that either. Dudara O'Malley might have told him he did that and got them safely to Spain. Do you know, that's the fake, you wouldn't know what to believe there. And unless you found evidence of a mass grave to see that, I'd leave that in the realm of interpretation.
So was Dudara still alive in 1588?
Not her father now, there was another Dudara. I don't know when her father died actually. What year?
Who, Grace's?
Yeah.
I think he died 1570. Didn't he die 1575? And then Mullowney came in as chief in 1576.
Yeah. I don't know. I never found the exact date. Yeah.
I have a question actually about where we're sitting right now, because this is supposed to be the remains of Grace O'Malley's castle, but you were saying...
No, she never had a castle. She took them when she needed it.
Right.
She never owned a castle.
Have you seen the dungeons downstairs?
I have.
Is that part of the building? Because then you said it was 21 yards across.
21 yards. O'Donovan came, when his books of survey and distribution, he said that the old O'Malley fortress of Carnamarth was 21 yards southwest of the present Westport House. Now, Westport House extended that way, of course, as well, which would make it even closer, you know. So these old dungeons could very well be from the old fortress. They certainly look old enough anyway. You know, or else they could have been, you know, to store wine back for the Browns some years ago.
And do we see dungeons like this in any of the other castles?
No.
No. Why do you think that might be?
Maybe this one stored Napiaba, the casks of wine, you know. Yeah. So what we were talking about down in Napiaba to be called, that was not to do with the uilleann pipes. I think it was to do with the casks of pipes that were called of wine then.
And do you have any idea why his genealogy peters out after 3 generations? He just doesn't. His line doesn't appear to have been very successful through the generations.
Well, you know, it could have been anything. It could have been illness. It could have been, you know, you've all these things to contend with, you know, as well. He could have. There might be a disease in the family. You wouldn't know. Did he marry? Are you certain that Donal Napiaba married?
I wouldn't say that I'm certain, but certainly we have found 3 generations of his descendants. And the last generation just says 3 sons, and that's it.
Well, I found no evidence now to that. But the only reference to him was when Grace O'Malley was going to Queen Elizabeth, she asked that he be released as well as her son, because he had been on a trumped-up charge of murdering some British or English soldiers.
And it's interesting that if he was indeed Grace's brother, and it seems that he wasn't elected chief after the father died. It was Mullowney.
Well, I don't think he was her full brother now, because as I said, there is a deed there to say that Grace O'Malley was the only heir of her mother Margaret. So I think Donal was a half-brother by another relationship other than her mother.
But he would still qualify for chief under the Derb Finna rules. Yeah.
But he mightn't have been the strongest, you know. His brother might have been.
Well, not if he was looking after casks of wine in the dungeon.
Or playing the uilleann pipes.
So in that era where it would have been very much dominated by male succession, how did we get Grace come to the forefront and put herself in that position? Was it all herself driving herself forward constantly?
Absolutely. You can see it. You can see it in her. You know, there's something extraordinary. Even after all these years, you know, you find she's just inspirational and iconic. She's a one-off, really. I don't know of any. I should have brought really the map, the Baptista map, drawn for Queen Elizabeth. It was by a famous cartographer called Battista Boazio. He was Italian. And Grace O'Malley went to meet Queen Elizabeth in 1593, and this map was drawn of Ireland a year afterwards. And if you they hadn't a clue about the shape of Ireland. You know, that's why the O'Malleys were so important as pilots, because nobody knew this coast. There were no maps to show the hidden reefs, the rocky headlands, the terrible tidal flows. So the O'Malleys provided pilot services right up and down the coastline. So consequently, Elizabeth, as the Tudor conquest continued pace, They wanted to have a more accurate map of Ireland, and this Baptista Bozio was told to draw one. And it was to be a political as well as a physical map. So he had to put in every chieftain that he could find in the country. And they're all male. And yet when you come over here to the barony of Mersk, you have the O'Malley chieftain, and above it is Grania Nimalia, the only woman mentioned in a political map that I know of. Elizabeth was never mentioned, her name was never written on a map. Catherine the Great was never mentioned on a map. And there's the only woman on a map. I have a copy of that. I'm sorry I didn't bring it with me now. And it's a beautifully drawn map, not very accurate, of Ireland. But all the male chieftains are all there, all around the country, and there's Granny O'Malley. And I think that sums up her whole life as an old woman. She's an iconic example of positive aging. The last entry in the state papers I found was at 67 years of age. She's leading an attack on MacNeil of the island of Barra in the Outer Hebrides in Scotland. Now, it's easy to say 67, and regretfully I have to say that was old age. It was like 97 in 16th century Ireland, because the life expectancy of women on average was around 40. And here is this woman still up there. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. And I didn't go into any of her life, and I'm not going to now, but she was in prison in Dublin Castle for a whole year of her life. We forget about that. She didn't have it all her own way. She had to go through this terrible, terrible time of a takeover of an outmoded older country by a more powerful, acquisitive, mercantile country like England. It's happening as we speak, I'm sure, in other places. And everything goes with that. All your laws, your language, your culture, your dress, everything. And Grace O'Malley starts her life when that culture, the Gaelic culture, is at its highest. At the time of her death, it's gone. So she's the great, to see through her life, you're also seeing a portion of her history that we very rarely hear about.
Just a comment on the male-female aspect of you mentioned it during the lecture as well. In the Grace O'Malley Taoiseach, we're now seeing quite a number of women actually apply for officers' positions. Some of them have been, skippers on the big Yates ferry, and others are. Some of them are commissioners of Irish Lights. Some of them are off on maternity leave because they're having babies. So I think that that is changing. Faster than we think. And when I say maritime careers, it's not just on ships. There's loads of other stuff that goes on in maritime, to do with science and biology and environment, whatever. So I just throw that in.
We are all graced out, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you for yes.
Right. I was just going to sneak a quick question into Morris before it was cut short, and he mentioned in his YouTube videos, don't go down the DNA route unless you're willing to find out something you don't want to know about. And he didn't say that today.
Everybody is welcome as long as you have an O'Malley name. Then I always quote Shakespeare, who in Act 2, Scene 3 of Romeo and Juliet famously said, an O'Malley by any other name would smell as sweet.
Well, thank you all very much for coming, and hopefully this will be repeated again next year, and we'll be able to find out how the project has gone.
Very good.